Hello, and welcome to this presentation on open education and open pedagogy. I'm Kirk Snyder, Touro University's Open Educational Resources Librarian. You may have heard about teaching with open educational resources, or OER, and how impactful it is in making higher education more affordable for students. Well, today I'm going to talk about what you can do with OER beyond simply assigning it to your class. We're going to look at what happens when we extend the freedoms of OER further into the realm of pedagogy and education more broadly. This is called open education, and it leverages the freedoms inherent in OER and proposes new models for instructor-student engagement. When we're talking about open education and open pedagogy, these are the key defining concepts that you will notice come up over and over again. Students as creators, process-oriented, knowledge creation, collaborative, renewable, participatory, networked, shared, active, interactive, and adapt. We have open education, open pedagogy, and OER. So, how do they relate? Open education is the philosophy, the movement, or the field of practice, centered around open pedagogy and OER. Open pedagogy is the set of teaching practices which are enabled by OER. And OER is the artifact, the teaching and learning material itself, like a textbook, for example, that's openly licensed. OER is the gateway through which we reach open education. It's the thing that enables open pedagogy and open education. Now we're going to add another important layer, which is Creative Commons. If OER is the gateway to open education, Creative Commons is the foundation. This represents the open copyright licenses that make OER, and by extension open education, possible. Creative Commons refers to both a nonprofit organization and the set of open copyright licenses they created. For a bit of context here, by the late 1990s, a schism became evident between the restrictive protections of copyright law and the new hypercharged sharing capabilities of the Internet. Stanford law professor Lawrence Lessig addressed this issue by founding Creative Commons and creating open copyright licenses that allowed authors to forego the restrictions on sharing their work that are inherent to copyright law. By creating these licenses, Creative Commons took care of all the tricky legal work for the rest of us who want to engage in open education. Now, let's quickly review the rights of OER, called the 5 R's, which are all the cool things we can do in open education because of Creative Commons licenses. With an openly licensed resource, users have the right to, number 1, retain it. This just means it's free for all users. Number 2, you have the right to reuse it for your own purposes, no permissions necessary. Number 3, you have the right to revise. So with OER, you can actually adapt, edit, and modify the content itself. Number 4 is remix. This refers to taking bits and pieces of different OERs and combining them to create your own customized resource. And number 5 is redistribute. So you just have the right to share the original OER or your remixed or adapted version freely with others. Since we're talking about pedagogical approaches made possible by technology, here are a few thoughts on that connection. Open pedagogy is OER-enabled pedagogy. And when no meaningful relationship exists between an educational technology and your pedagogy, then that tool itself loses value. And to further that point, paraphrasing David Wiley, adopting OER but making no changes to your teaching methods is kind of like driving an airplane down the road. Sure, the plane does have wheels and can be driven, but it was designed to do much more. The roots of open education. The open education movement dates as far back as the late 1960s. OER as we know them, however, are a newer conception made possible by the development of the Internet, which allowed for information to be shared freely, rapidly, and widely, and open licensing systems like the Creative Commons licenses, which debuted in 2002, that allow materials to be reused, built upon, and shared. By 2008, people in the OER world were beginning to look beyond the artifact of OER at what else could be done with these open sharing capabilities. The 2008 Cape Town Declaration posited that open education is not limited to just OER. It also draws upon open technologies that facilitate collaborative, flexible learning and the open sharing of teaching practices that empower educators to benefit from the best ideas of their colleagues. It invites educators to engage with open ed by creating, using, adapting, and improving OER, embracing educational practices built around collaboration, discovery, and the creation of knowledge, and inviting peers and colleagues to get involved. Open pedagogy. Now let's focus in on some teaching practices. Open pedagogy has been called networked participatory scholarship. It takes the old model of the instructor feeding information to students who passively take it in, to a new model where the student is actively engaged in their learning process. It goes from information consumption to knowledge creation. And it's about connecting to the world outside the classroom. One of the primary ways to engage in open pedagogy is with renewable assignments, which are contrasted with traditional disposable assignments. Now, a disposable assignment is one that does not add value to the world beyond supporting the learning of its creator. It's one where both faculty and students understand the work the student produces will ultimately be thrown away. And it's one that focuses on the student providing the correct answer. Now, in contrast, renewable assignments are those where the student's work or the artifact they produce will add value to the world beyond supporting the learning of its creator. With the renewable assignment, the student work lives on to support and be added on to by other learners. And with renewable assignments, the focus is not on simply providing the correct answer, but on the process that leads to the correct answer. Renewable assignments can empower students to do their best work. Producing work that has a purpose beyond being turned in to the instructor for grading can inspire students to step it up a notch. You might find that students take the work more seriously when they're producing things that can be used by their peers or the general public. David Wiley said in What is Open Pedagogy, "What if we changed these disposable assignments into activities which actually added value to the world? Then students and faculty might feel different about the time and effort they invested in them. I have seen time and again that they do feel different about the efforts they make under these circumstances." Before we look at some examples of open pedagogy projects, here's a rubric, David Wiley's 4-part test, that can be helpful for determining whether a class project could be considered open or not. Number 1, are students asked to create new artifacts or revise or remix existing OER? Number 2, does the new artifact have value beyond supporting the learning of its author? Number 3, are students invited to publicly share their new artifacts? Number 4, are students invited to openly license those new artifacts? Examples of open pedagogy projects. We're going to look at some common types or categories of open pedagogy projects, and then some specific examples of each one. Many open projects fall under these categories. At its most basic, open syllabi and lesson plans, social annotation of texts, contributing to the knowledge commons, adapting or improving an OER textbook, or student-created OER. One of the simplest ways to engage in open pedagogy is through open syllabi. One of the simplest ways to engage in open pedagogy is through open syllabi and lesson plans. This is pretty self-explanatory. It just involves publishing online with an open license your syllabi, lesson plans, or plans for a full course as a great way of sharing your professional knowledge and practices with peers and the rest of the world. The next type of open pedagogy project is the social annotation of texts. This is a way to collectively read and analyze a text. In this type of project, users can pinpoint sections of text by highlighting them and then comment on them, leaving their impressions, interpretations, or questions for peers and instructors to view and respond to, all right there on the document itself. This turns what is typically a solitary act of reading into a dynamic, social, interactive experience. It turns what is typically a static artifact of a text into a living, interactive document that changes and grows as users engage with it. Some recommended tools and platforms for social annotation assignments are Hypothesis and Google Docs. Both are free and easy to use. Let's look at an example of a project that uses Hypothesis. An example of a social annotation assignment is this one titled Marbury versus Madison. And this was for the course American Constitutional Foundations. So what happens in this project was that students collectively read and annotate a Supreme Court case using Hypothesis to post 3 questions about the case and engage with 2 peers' questions. The artifact left at the end of this project is a digital copy of the case Marbury versus Madison, annotated with students' and instructors' questions, ideas, and discussion. And the image you see here is a screenshot of the text with the Hypothesis window on it on the right side, where you can see student and instructors' writings and the highlighted portions of the original text that they correspond to. The next category of open pedagogy project is contributing to the knowledge commons. This refers to the shared body of collective knowledge and information that is available to us all. Wikipedia, Flickr, and Openverse are a few examples of sites that make up the Knowledge Commons. Here's an example of one such assignment called Murder, Madness, and Mayhem, Latin American Literature and Translation. Here, students were asked to edit, and in some cases create, Wikipedia articles on Latin American authors of significant dictator novels. The result is several high-quality and some featured status Wikipedia articles on a niche but important subject area that was lacking in content. Another example is this copy editing assignment from an argumentative writing course. Here, students are asked to copy edit Wikipedia articles to improve their authority and clarity. The artifact at the end of this assignment is several improved Wikipedia articles. Now, instead of adding to the Knowledge Commons like the previous example, here students are improving the content that's already a part of the Commons. This is useful for the broader public and exercises the students' argumentative writing and copy editing skills. The next category of Open Pedagogy project is adapting an OER textbook. This involves taking an existing OER and making edits or additions to it to make it more relevant for your course. Here's one example of adapting an OER textbook called Project Management for Instructional Designers. Faculty and students at Brigham Young University collaboratively revised an existing open textbook on project management, removing sections that were irrelevant to their needs and adding material specific to their field, which is instructional design. The artifact produced by this project is a new project management textbook that focuses on the needs and practices of instructional designers. The last category of open pedagogy projects we'll look at is student-created OER. This is similar to our last example, but much broader, as there are many ways to have students create openly licensed materials. Our first example is this Interpersonal Communication Take and Teach renewable assignment and module from Clark College. Here, students were asked to choose an interpersonal communication topic of their choice to create a presentation on. Students are instructed in universal design for learning and open educational resources. And for the final product, students create a PowerPoint or poster presentation on their topic, teach their peers about it, and publish their presentation online with a CC license for the rest of the world to use. Our next example is from Northwest Arkansas Community College. Martin Luther King and the Ecology of Black Thought. In this assignment, students read, socially annotate, and create videos to explore connections between King's and other Black leaders' ideas. Students learn about Creative Commons licenses, power dynamics in knowledge production, and usage of software and electronic resources. And what the public receives from this project is a series of videos that can trace King's thought throughout American Black thought, and thus the depth and boundaries of the context of King's thought grows with every class that uses this assignment. Here's an example from right here at Touro University. Dr. Michelle Buccina in the Occupational Therapy Department is creating a lab manual for her Human Movement, Behavior, and Occupation course. Her students are collaboratively working to help create media, like photos and videos, that illustrate key concepts in kinesiology. The resulting artifact for this project will be an openly licensed, web-based occupational therapy lab manual using Google Sites. Now, the final example we'll look at is another one from right here at Touro University. This project is a collaboration between myself, as Touro's OER librarian, and faculty member Dr. Bunker Alberts for her Advanced Pharmacology course. For this project, students choose a primary care health topic to research. They receive education on the core concepts of OER. Then they gather, compile, and synthesize information from various open sources into their own remix document. The final artifacts produced by this project are several remixed or adapted OER modules on common healthcare topics, openly licensed and published online, supporting the students' own learning as well as that of future learners.